Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Elaine and I for the Collateral Q&A session. We're excited to share some of our collateral knowledge with you and just have an open dialogue this morning, hopefully gaining some additional information that you'd like about collateral or anything at the bank. If we can answer it, we'll try. Between the two of us, we've got quite a bit of years and knowledge under our belt. For everyone's benefit, we do have you all muted. Hopefully Elaine and I aren't muted. We did test that out earlier, and Russ told us that he could hear us. So everyone is muted, but we will be utilizing the chat and Q&A functions. You just hover towards the top of your screen, and the little drop down there will allow you to answer the questions. We also have some questions that were submitted with your registration, and so we'll be addressing those also. With that being said, we'll go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Elaine Shoemaker. I've been with the bank, oh gosh, for a very long time now. And what are we working on, 34 years? Started back in kindergarten. So when I came to the bank, I was in the wire transfer area and moved to safekeeping. And then, gosh, back in 2008, became the manager of what is now financial services, which includes safekeeping and collateral operations. So anytime you're pledging or releasing collateral, that comes through us.
Excellent. Thank you, Elaine. And I'm Kylie Morgan. I am the Director of Financial Services. I actually joined the bank back in 2007 as a collateral review analyst. We call them collateral review officers now, but I actually traveled and performed collateral verifications for a bit, and then I managed that department for quite a while. In January 2017, I was promoted to the Director of Financial Services, so I oversee both Elaine's team, the collateral and safekeeping, collateral operations and safekeeping, as well as the collateral review and collateral verification processes. So all of that is under the financial services umbrella. We have no agenda today. Our agenda today is to answer your questions. That's really it. So we don't have a lot of slides or presentation. This is just going to be a lot of, Elaine's going to read off your questions, and I'm going to do the best to answer them, or if they're for Elaine, vice versa. So with that said, Elaine, why don't you just go ahead and start?
Okay, will do. So the first question I have, Kylie, is for you. Do we allow swap loans as collateral?
That is a very good question. And just for everyone to kind of like level set what a swap loan is, typically there's a swap agreement with a third-party vendor that you have entered into. And so it's sort of this layered agreement on top of your loan. What I will say about swap agreements is that what we've found with every agreement that we've read through is that there's typically something in the contract that makes it ineligible. Once we found that there was something that specifically said that the asset could not be pledged to another party. But typically what the issue is that we find is that the collateral, the vendor for the swap typically takes priority position in the collateral, which then puts us out, right? So then we are not able to gain access to that collateral in the event that we would need to. And so that is why typically we do not accept swap agreements. But not all swap agreements are created equal, so I can't say that every single one would not be eligible. It would probably be something that's more on a case-by-case. So if you have swap loans, I would say probably not to include them unless you have cleared it with someone in the collateral department.
Very nice. Okay. Have another one for you. Are the anti-predatory rules in effect for business purpose loans as defined by Reg Z?
They're actually not. So our anti-predatory loans anti-predatory characteristics that we identify them as. So that's, prepayment fees beyond the early years, high rates and fees, those types of things do not apply to business loans. So if it's a single family asset, but it's for a rental property, so it's a business loan, we do not check the anti-predatory policy against it.
Okay. Next question. Where will the recordings of the webinars be at? And I can actually answer that one. That is, they're going to be posted out on our members-only Collateral landing page. Currently, last year's webinars are recorded are out there. And this new session will be out there probably sometimes towards the end of next week. So we'll look for those there. How about, Kylie, this one's for you. What about income and employment verification on business purpose?
Yes. So the difference between anti-predatory is that, at least according to our legal department, it was very specific that anti-predatory does not apply to business loans. However, in the non-traditional guidance, we were not able to come to that same conclusion. And so income and employment verification is required on investment properties that are single family. And so we would require that there was a tax return obtained if they're self-employed, or if they are an employed individual, a W-2 or some other form of income or employment verification. So although it's different, the rules around them are very different.
Okay. How about, can I pledge a loan with an e-signature? And maybe you can explain the difference between an e-signature versus an e-note. All of that gives you, Kylie? That's a big loaded question, I realize.
Yes. So everybody buckle up, right? There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to discuss here. The first thing that I'll say is that not all e-signatures are created equal. What we are currently working on is the ability for our members to pledge e-notes to us. And e-notes would, there's sort of some tenets of e-notes to ensure that a note is written to e-note standards. So it needs to comply with UVITA and e-sign. It needs to be written on a MISMO Smart Doc 1.02. It needs to have a tamper-resistant seal. So once it is signed, you sort of lock down that signature. It needs to be stored in an e-vault. The actual note needs to be stored in an e-vault, and then also it needs to be registered on the MERS e-registry. So those are sort of the very high-level standards for an e-note. And all of that is done with an e-signature, right? So in that instance, an e-signature, according to our new underwriting guidelines, would be allowed starting with the March 31 QCD. However, not all e-signatures equal an e-note. So all e-notes have an e-signature, but not all e-signatures are an e-note. And so it would need to meet those requirements, and it would need to check all of those boxes in order for it to be eligible.
Well, you summed that up pretty nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think this question pertains to collateral verification and the process around that. Can we use our own Excel spreadsheet instead of the QCD loan support template that's provided by the collateral review officer?
The short answer is no. The much longer answer is we will work with you on figuring that out. We need it to be on the QCD loan support template because that's how we generate and store the information. So we generate our sample from that QCD loan support template. We also upload it into our collateral database, so that way When we're assigning lending values and those types of things, we do a look back at that data that's been provided to say, maybe the market's not doing well, but hey, all of our members pledged, loan to values that are fantastic. So maybe the market's not great, but we can support a better lending value based on the information that we're provided. And so it's important to get it on that template so that we can use it. But when I say that we'll work with you, typically if you can get something out of Excel, we can figure out how to move it from your Excel template to ours and somehow work through that process. So the short answer is it has to be on our template, but the longer answer of that is that we're willing to work with you in getting it on the template if needed.
Okay. I have a kind of a two-part question here for you, Kylie. Do appraisals have to be a certain age? And then does the DSR have a time limit?
Yeah, so those are great questions. For the appraisal, we do not have sort of an age limit on appraisals. Typically, if you got it done at the beginning of the loan, at origination, that will hold true. Typically, kind of the unwritten rule, or to sort of be in compliance with the interagency guidance, is if you're advancing new money, you should probably get a new appraisal if that appraisal is, a few years old, or if the market has changed. If your market has changed dramatically, a new appraisal might be warranted. That's probably more if your market has dropped as opposed to increased. From a DSCR perspective, for our blanket pledge members, we do not have a time frame or sort of an aging of the debt service coverage ratio. If you calculated it at the beginning, we are fine with that calculation. We do not require an update for our blanket pledge members. For our specific pledge members, we require an annual renewal of that debt service coverage ratio.
And if you don't know which one you are, please ask. We're happy to answer any of those questions. Excess land and vacant land, are they considered to be the same thing, Kylie?
This is a tricky question because it's sort of yes and no. The existence of excess land on a loan itself does not immediately make it ineligible. However, we would not count any of the value of the excess land that has not been developed or does not have a property on it. So if the appraisal identifies, a separate parcel and gives value to it, we would not include that in the loan to value calculation. As far as if it's just straight vacant land, it's ineligible. So yes, it's different, but it needs, the calculation around it gets a little bit tricky.
With the new underwriting guidelines that have been established, when does all of that go into effect and the timing of the lending value changes?
Sure. So this year, in particular, we have pushed back the effective date of the new underwriting guidelines and the lending value changes. Typically, when our board meets in October, we normally make those effective maybe in November or December. We actually elected to make them effective on the first business day of 2021, so January 4th. And the reason for that is that there are a couple of large changes, specifically with the multifamily and commercial construction receiving a lending value of 0, and then the addition of interest-only loans in commercial real estate and multifamily real estate. And so we felt like those changes were significant enough that we wanted to allow our members quite a bit of time to evaluate their portfolios and figure out their collateral position and how they want to pledge. And so we made them effective in January, which means for our blanket pledge members who report on the QCD form, those changes will not be effective until you report on your March 31 QCD. For our specific pledge members, any delivered assets, and for our, so the delivered assets of our specific pledge members, and then also any blanket pledge members who report via delivery, those assets would be, or excuse me, those changes would be effective on January 4th. That includes securities.
All right, so this question goes back to the DSCR. If a loan qualifies at consummation, but in the normal course of business, a new DSCR does get calculated that drops below the 1-to-1 ratio, does the loan need to be dropped from pledging?
Yes. Yes. So as that loan evolves, as it matures, as it progresses, if it's not like an evergreen type of thing, right? If it's eligible, but then for some reason it moves to ineligible, then you would need to remove it from pledging.
If the original promissory note was for a construction or rehab loan, and we renew or rewrite into new loan, does this constitute a construction rehab loan any longer? Or if the loan is a construction to perm loan, goes from drawing during construction, then goes into a permanent closed end loan with P&I payments, would this still be considered a construction loan? Kind of a long question.
Yeah. So for a construction to perm on residential, we do allow that. Our underwriting guidelines, once the asset has moved from construction, so once there's completion certificate, it's been fully advanced, everything's done, you've sort of closed out that, we would, once that term is over, the construction term is over, you could then pledge it in our single family, and the term to maturity would be from that conversion date to the maturity date at the end of the loan. And so the short answer is, yes, you can pledge it. You would pledge it in construction while it's in construction, as long as it met all of those requirements. And then you could pledge it in the single family once it converted over, if it meets all of those requirements. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question, Elaine?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Sure.
The next question came in about rehabilitation loans. How do we determine when a loan is considered a rehabilitation loan? For example, if the as-is value of a property supports the loan request, even though some of the proceeds may be used for improvements, is that a rehab loan?
It's a really great question. My short answer is it depends, and it's super gray, and I know that's not the best answer to give. It depends on, the extent of the rehab. If let me give it a short answer. The as-is value, if you can cover the loan to value, will typically be fine, right? We will go with the as-is value. The only time we wouldn't go with the as-is value is if it was going to, as is, the land covers it, but none of the structure covers it. And because we talked a little bit earlier about how we can't accept vacant land, if you're only getting value from the land and there's no value put on the structure at all, then I would say that falls more into construction. If you're going to be, tearing that down or completely gutting it. If it is that, there's some value in the structure and you're just swapping out carpet and interiors and all of that, then I think that would be fine to use the as-is value. So again, it's a little tricky and there's a super fine line there. But I would say the majority of the time, the as-is value would be sufficient as long as it includes some of the building structure in that value.
Elizabeth, I hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-up, please let me know. How
Yeah,
about
and that goes for all of this. That's for all of this. If none of these are clear, certainly let us know and we will answer again or clarify anything.
Try to expand a little bit more. How about LIBOR-linked loans? You know, we've made changes to the QCD form and are collecting LIBOR-linked loan information. But this question is, when will LIBOR-linked loans no longer be eligible for pledging?
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. That is a really good question. I think that it's something we've all talked about for a long time, and now it's sort of here, right? We're almost to the end of 2020, and the end of 2021 is when that transition is supposed to happen. And so what I can say is what we're doing. I can't speak to exactly when or how that's going to work, but I'll certainly walk through what we are currently doing. As Elaine noted, we are collecting LIBOR information today on the assets that are pledged to us for those loans that all of our members are pledging. We want to know if there's LIBOR-linked collateral out there. And some of that is to know how much, and some of it is to sort of confirm in our brains, in our thinking, that it's not really a lot for our members. So we are, again, beginning to collect that information just to sort of scale it, right? How much LIBOR-linked collateral is out there that's being pledged to us? So the first step is to scale. The second step, and some of this comes directly from our regulator, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the FHFA, if you will. They have provided us a lot of guidance on how we should handle LIBOR-linked collateral. The reality is, after 2021, if you do not have appropriate fallback language, or if you have not appropriately modified that asset to refer to a different index, and that index goes away, the note might not carry any value at that point. We don't know what the market's going to do. We don't know if the asset can be sold at that point. We don't know if anybody would buy it. So there's sort of this unknown, blank space out there that we're sort of trying to anticipate. But the truth is that no one knows. My gut, and again, I don't know for certain, but my gut is that probably mid-2020, if you have not started to make those adjustments to your LIBOR-linked collateral, there may be some additional lending value changes or implications to that. And then at the end of 2021, if that index completely goes away and you have not made adjustments to your collateral, then it most likely will be ineligible. That, again, is what I'm anticipating, but we have a whole team of folks in our credit division who are monitoring that very closely. We have a board that has to approve that. We have an amazing executive team that also has to approve that. And so some of that comes directly from our regulator that says we have to do something, but a lot of that also is us determining how that path is paved. So that would be my anticipation, is that sometime probably mid-2020, there would be a reduction in lending value if there have not been adjustments made, and then in 2021, the assets would no longer be eligible.
Okay, thank you. That's a great response, Kylie.
Thanks.
Question here from Mary Jo. Could you please clarify when revolving lines of credit are eligible?
Yeah. So it depends on the asset category. Some, and I know this gets tricky, right? But the asset category, some of them allow for revolving lines and others do not. So let's just go run through them. And Elaine, if I miss one, please call me out. Single family. So for our single family, our FHA, our conventional FHA, VA, those need to be fully dispersed. So no revolving lines of credit there. Multifamily, no revolving lines of credit. Excuse me. Ag real estate and commercial real estate, no revolving lines of credit. Our second mortgages are also no revolving lines of credit, but we do have a HELOC category, which can be a revolving line of credit. Our residential construction, and I'll even throw in the multifamily and commercial construction because right now they are receiving lending value. Typically you see construction loans to be a straight line of credit as opposed to revolving, but there's nothing that precludes you from having a revolving line in the construction category, just that it meets the qualifications for the time limit on those assets. And then we move into our ag operating, which does allow for revolving line of credit, and our equipment does not. And so in short, I think the ones that do allow it all the time are home equity lines of credit and ag operating are our revolving line asset categories.
Yep, I think you got them all covered there, Kylie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question up. What should my first move be if I'm filing a QCD and notice that the assets I'm pledging don't cover our current liabilities with FHLBank?
That is a really great question.
That's a problem.
So very first step, I would say, is to retrace your steps. Make sure that you did not, input something incorrectly, that you didn't leave off a zero or not include something that you intended to include. Typically, we don't see a lot of members who QCD to QCD have large shifts in collateral. Sometimes they choose to pledge differently, but for the most part, loan assets stay fairly even. But I would say if you double check everything and you have entered in everything correctly and you feel like you have exhausted all of the collateral that is eligible for you to pledge, I would say your very first step would be, obviously after you've talked internally and cleared this with everyone in your organization, is to make a call to Elaine or myself. Make a call to us and have that conversation. What we will probably do is start to talk through what other assets you have, what you have excluded, why you're not including it. Do you have any securities collateral? Do you have any cash? What are your current credit obligations? We're going to kind of run the gamut to figure out what is it and how can we, the only way to change that balance is what other collateral do you have or what obligations do you have and how can we balance those more appropriately. And so hopefully through that phone call, we identify additional collateral and get you completely covered. And if not, then we probably would need to get your regional account manager involved and figure out from there what our next steps are.
Great. Other options, yes. Well, we won't go into other options. But next question then. What revisions will be made to the member guide for loan accommodations? For example, exemptions exemptions have been made to allow banks to alter debt notes without it being troubled or restructured due to COVID. Wanted to determine if the accounting reporting treatment will be in line with the QCD requirements. So yes, all those COVID changes that we made.
Yeah. So for we published in May, I believe, temporary coronavirus underwriting requirements, COVID-19 underwriting requirements, which allows some of that activity that you've talked about. So forbearance or modifications to potentially interest only for a short period of time. So we have published already what those accommodations would be and what we would accept. Today we have not altered those. I am not sure how long they will be out there. I don't know when they will be removed, but currently today, temporary coronavirus underwriting requirements are published. I believe they're on page 80 currently of the Member Products and Services Guide. So if you haven't checked them out, please do, because I'm hoping that it meets the accommodations that you're requesting.
All right. So this next question is more of an eligibility question. For a commercial loan secured by equipment, we used the purchase price of the equipment and discounted it by 50%. Is that an acceptable method of valuing the equipment for FHLB eligibility purchases?
Yes, we would use the sales amount, honestly, from a valuation standpoint. Equipment gets a little tricky, but we would use a purchase, a bill of sale as a value, right? If someone's willing to purchase it for a value and someone's willing to sell it for a value, that pretty much identifies what the value of the asset is. So we would be willing to accept that. So even the additional 50% that you're using is more than enough abundance.
Okay, so the next question up then is regards to credit scores. If we have a tri-merge credit report, can we use the highest credit score for the individual for eligibility to pledge to the FHLB, or do we need to use the middle score? Also, if there's a joint applicant, one of the applicant score qualifies. The other joint applicant does not meet the minimum credit score. Is this still eligible to pledge this loan?
Yes. So we will take the highest score of either borrower, of any borrower. If you have 4 borrowers, we're going to take the highest score. I know that, secondary market standards are typically the middle lower. So if there are, 2 borrowers and the middle score falls out, they would use that score. We're going to try to get you to the highest score that we can. So out of all of the borrowers, we're going to use the highest score.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, to follow up on your last comment about the COVID-19, the temporary underwriting guidelines, do you know how much of a notice we will get before the temporary COVID-19 are removed from the schedule of eligible collateral?
I do not know that, but typically there is, a sufficient notice for the majority of our members who are pledging on the QCD form. So typically there's an effective date that's made, and then it would not be until the next QCD form that it would be required. And so usually there is quite a bit of time in between that effective date and the QCD reporting date. But I have not heard how much lead-in time there would be. Of course, I would hope and I would expect that we would provide adequate lead-in time to give our members the ability to not only, number one, figure out what they're going to do with those assets that may be falling out, and 2, to determine just how to report them, right? Like it's not the easiest thing to go through your loans to pull out which ones now meet and don't meet. And so obviously we would need to give you some time to be able to report them correctly.
That was a really good question.
It was.
I have another eligibility question for you, Kylie. If a commercial loan is secured by a truck used for business purposes, is this loan eligible from a collateral standpoint to pledge?
So we get this question a lot, and it's a little tricky because vehicle loans are not eligible per regulation. So we cannot accept vehicle loans. A truck used for commercial purposes, again, it's super gray, and that line is very, very narrow. I typically say if you don't need the asset, I would not include it. I would say for trucks that are not personal vehicles, right? So a trailer, truck trailer, a fifth wheel, even a very, very large truck that obviously is used to, move equipment that you're not going to see at the stoplight next to you. I would say that most of those would be fine. But if it's, Chevy Silverado and you use it for personal and you use it for equipment, I would not pledge that, because I don't think that line is enough. It's a little too blurry, if that makes sense.
It did. Thanks. Loans cross-collateralized. Is the loan eligible to pledge, and in which category? Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a good question. And it's hard, right? Because I know that when I wrote loans, you want all the assets you can take, they're gonna give you to secure that. And so it does get a little tricky on where do you pledge it and how do you pledge it. Essentially, it needs to be 100% secured. So it needs to be fully secured. As we talked about in our eligibility webinar last week, that is just kind of the overarching for all asset categories. The loan has to be fully secured. So it gets a little tricky when you secure it by, let's say, ag real estate and also equipment, right? So essentially what you would need to do if it's cross-collateralized and it needs both to cover the loan to value, you would want to ensure that both assets meet the underwriting requirements, so that if it weren't for the loan to value problem, that the ag real estate loan would qualify and the equipment loan would qualify. And then the combined value together meets the requirement for loan to value. If you can do that, then you would need to pledge the asset in the loan category with the least amount of lending value, which is typically, as you go down the QCD form, is usually how that works. Sometimes it doesn't, but so in this case, ag real estate versus equipment, you would put it in the equipment category. But the important part is to make sure that for each of the asset categories that it meets both. If it's cross-collateralized with something that does not qualify, so let's say in the instance that you've got a commercial real estate building and a personal vehicle, we would not include any value for the personal vehicle. So you would want to ensure that everything else covers, not just that everything covers with the commercial real estate, and we would not use the vehicle for any sort of supplemental value.
Perfect. Next question. Are subprime and loans that fail the anti-predatory rules pretty much the same thing? Any difference, and what would the differences be between the two of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. They are different. So our anti-predatory policy is in our member products and services guide. There are a few requirements that we have there. Off of memory, going to try. So it cannot have prepayment fees beyond the early years, 3 to 5 years is acceptable, but it cannot have prepayment fees for the life of the loan. It cannot violate HOEPA, so high fees and rates. It cannot carry mandatory arbitration, so you cannot require that of your borrower. And it also cannot have single premium credit life or disability. So those are the anti-predatory characteristics that we're looking for. For the subprime, it's really getting down into the credit quality of the asset. And for single family assets, that's really looking at the FICO score and debt to income ratio. And so we do have two tests for subprime. Test one is an and statement. So it's an and test. And that includes a FICO score that is less than 660 with a combined debt to income greater than 50%. So it's an and. So it's, again, less than 660 and a debt to income more than 50%. So if you have a 659 credit score and a 51% debt to income, it's out. If you have a 661 credit score and a 51% debt to income, on test one it's in, right? So it has to be both. One can mitigate the other, but if they're both out, then it doesn't meet the test one. Test two is sort of an or, not sort of an or, it is an or. So it's an or statement where if the FICO score is less than 620 or the debt to income is greater than 55%, we're going to look for additional compensating factors. So there are perfectly legit reasons of why you would write a loan or provide a loan to a borrower who has a FICO score less than 620 or a debt to income greater than 55%. And so we're looking for those reasons. If you can provide us with a compensating factor, then we will accept that test. That test will pass. If you do not have a compensating factor or a compensating factor that's fact-based, and I'll explain that in just a moment. If the compensating factor is, well, I've known his family for 30 years. That's not a compensating factor. That's fact-based. I mean, it is factual that you've known his family for 30 years, but it's not factual that, that enhances the credit quality of the loan. And so that's really what we're looking for there is the or statement. And if it falls out of the 620 or greater than 55%, give us another reason why you wrote that loan, right? Was the loan to value a factor? Kind of go back to those 5 C's of lending. But you have to leave the character out of it because the character is not something that we can evaluate. It's very subjective. And so really you have to get back to, what is the collateral? What's the loan to value? Time on the job? Probably if they have let's say they have a super low FICO, let's say it's, 598, but their debt to income is 8%. So they have all of this additional ample income. I would say that's a compensating factor. So, it's really an evaluation of the credit quality of the loan and how it was written.
That was a really good question. So I've got kind of a follow-up question to the one prior. Margaret says, I may have missed the answer when the discussion of trucks was made, but are semis okay? We have a lot of those used by farmers in the area as well as truck drivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, semis are fine.
You don't see, it's not a personal vehicle, right?
Right.
So, all right. Pledging ag line of credit loan, adequately secured by crops in inventory in January. Can this line of credit continue to be pledged in July when all the crops in inventory be sold? So if the line of credit is eligible at the outset of the loan, is it pledgeable throughout the year?
So this gets a little tricky, but my assumption is that once that line is sold, or once the crop is sold, that the balance goes down. And so you would always need to have enough collateral to support the outstanding balance, because the thought is that as you're increasing the balance, you're also increasing the collateral, right? So the value is going up. And so my short answer is yes, as long as you have adequate collateral.
And then it really is as of that, whatever it is as of that quarter end, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we don't expect you to update throughout a particular quarter, but each quarter when you file your new QCD form, it would need to be updated, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. All right. Oh, split use here. How about the property is a home, but being used as an office? Do we pledge that as commercial real estate or under the one?
So that's super tricky. And probably more gray than anything. And I know everybody likes black and white, but unfortunately, no two loans are ever created equal. They're never written equal. There are a lot of unique characteristics that we find in all of our loans, so that are pledged to us. So a loan that is, let's say it looks like a single family residence from the outside, but the inside has been turned into a commercial business. I think it's going to depend on how much revision has been done internally. And I know that's really not a great answer, but it's if it still has a kitchen and it still has a bathroom and it still has a bedroom, can you still call it a house? Probably. If it's zoned as residential, you probably want to call it residential if it still has those characteristics. If it's been completely gutted and it no longer has any of those and it's zoned commercial, I would put it in commercial. So again, it's probably a super unique situation, and it's probably just going to be evaluating that particular property. I don't think that you would apply that across the board. I think that you would really have to look at that particular property and determine which way does it lean? How is it zoned? What is the structure? What is it, what is the internal or the inside of that structure look like, to determine which category it should go in. Because at the end of the day, our underwriting requirements they're not purpose driven, they're collateral driven. And so we're getting to the heart of what is the collateral, not what is it being used for.
Excellent clarification. This kind of goes back to an earlier question. This is not to reiterate on earlier question, but wondering if this is different. A $500,000 home on property valued at $200,000, say it's a working farm, a loan for $550,000. Does it have to be qualified as ag?
No, I don't think so. Again, it's pretty unique. It would really, you want to take a look at that appraisal, how much value of the property is coming from the house itself, the structure, how much of the value is coming from the land. I would say if the majority of it is coming from the farm, I would put that in and it's zoned as far as ag real estate, I would probably put that in ag real estate. But if the majority of the value is coming from the house, I would put it in residential. And the one really good thing about where you put it is during a collateral verification, we call those qualifying loans. So if you happen to put it in ag real estate and it should be in single family, or you put it in single family and it should be in ag real estate, once we evaluate that, we're going to tell you where it should go, but it's not going to count against you as an exception. So qualifying loans in a collateral verification do not account against your exception rate. It's just non-qualifying loans. So loans that don't belong on the QCD at all would count against your exception rate. If the loan is still eligible and it's just in the wrong category, we're going to ask you to move it to the correct category, but it's not going to count against you from an exception standpoint.
That's good to know. Yes. So on that question, do we have a small acreage ag real estate loan? Is there a minimum acreage requirement?
There isn't. It's very broad. The underwriting requirement is very broad. But what I would say is that it's ag real estate that is being worked. So whether you have cattle on it or crop, if it's zoned appropriately, then you can pledge it. If it is, for example, my family, we built a house last year. That acreage was just sitting there. I certainly am not a farmer. I'm more of an indoor kind of gal. But that would not have been ag real estate because it was not actively being worked as farmland. But my neighbor next door has way more acreage than I do, and he has cows, and he works it as ag real estate. And so although we are right next to each other, his I would consider ag real estate, and mine I would consider not. So again, it comes down to what's happening on that property, what is it zoned, how is it being utilized, and really what is the collateral is really what we're getting to.
All right. We have a follow-up question back to the ag line of credit eligibility. Are growing crops eligible to secure a line of credit? The growing crops will be insured with multi-peril crop insurance. As the line of credit grows through the year, crop inventory is sold, but advances are made for current year crop inputs. So can the growing crop value offset the sale of crop inventory?
Yes, we have had lots of discussions about growing crops over the years, and I would say that, you know, we've come to realize that with ag operating loans, it's a moving target, right? Like it's not like going and getting an appraisal on a house. It's a moving target. There's constantly, you know, inputs, you know, stuff that you're putting into it, whether that's rent, whether that's fertilizer, whether, you know, all of that. There's constant inputs that are being put into the asset, and then you're selling it off, right? So it is a bit of a moving target. I guess in short, what I would say is if we can figure out how to make the math work and you can show us exactly where you stand, traditionally our position is to figure out if that works, right? Like we're not going to say absolutely not, that doesn't work. Show me how many bushels you have, right? Like that's not traditionally our stance. We're going to look at, if you can explain that to me exactly how much you've put into it and where the value is today, then we're going to take that into consideration. I know that's not the super black and white answer everybody would love, but the reality is that when it comes to ag operating loans, they are not black and white. They're very gray.
Right. And so when in doubt, always feel free to pick up the phone and call. You know, Kylie and the review officers are very knowledgeable, and they're here to help answer those questions. So great follow-up. Okay, so I have just another one or two, I think is all. Phase one environmental report. Is a borrower environmental questionnaire satisfactory to meet this requirement? Do you have to have the phase one? And then do you have a list of property types that would need a phase one, a clean phase one report?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So the types of property that would require a phase one would fall into our commercial real estate category. If they exhibit adverse environmental factors, so it's not every commercial real estate loan. If they exhibit adverse environmental factors, if it is a gas station, a place where you get your oil changed, like a Jiffy Lube, a dry cleaner. Typically is where I'm at is if you have to dispose of something properly, then you probably need a phase one. So with that being said, an internal report or another type of environmental report does not substitute for our phase one requirement. And the phase one requirement is for it to be clean. Helene always corrects me on that because I think I fail to always say a clean phase one. So if there are recognized environmental conditions in that phase one, it would not be eligible.
The devil's in the detail, right? And where we live.
And as far as a list of properties, we do not maintain a list of the types of properties that would require a phase one. That list would be a mile long, and there's no way to, keep track of that. So really, I think it comes down to if this is going to sound crazy, but if someone can sue you because you did not maintain the environmental aspect of that property, you should probably get a phase one. And the reason why we require it is in the event that we had to take over that asset, someone could sue us for that transfer of environmental liability. And it's just not something that we would accept.
That's a great explanation, clarification. Here's one. Treatment of real estate with marijuana-related tenants. Is that eligible? Do we accept that?
We do not. So if a property, and this is in our underwriting requirements for our commercial real estate, ag real estate, ag operating and equipment, if the property or equipment is used for marijuana-related business, it is not eligible. We understand in our 4-state area, specifically Colorado, that it is legal. However, federally, marijuana is not legal, and so we are not able to accept it. So if it has any marijuana-related business tied to it, it is not eligible.
And that's across all asset categories, right?
Yep.
Gosh, so far, I think I've just got one more. It says, what is the best method for communicating to a collateral review officer about individual exception items? How do you know which officer is assigned to a specific loan? So I think that's, kind of a twofold question there.
Absolutely. So if you are, for collateral verification, you would know who your collateral review officer is. You're going to be the one who is working with you from start to finish. So I think this is probably more related to our delivered loans or our delivered assets. We do not assign specific loans to a collateral review officer. As those assets come in, as those loans come in, whoever is available, whoever is in the office that week, will take those assets and those loans and review them for eligibility. But the reality is that anyone can answer them. If you want to get to a specific collateral review officer, you can always reach out to myself or to Amber, and we will tell you who the collateral review officer is, or we have a group email that you can send your question to, and whoever the officer was that reviewed that loan, they will pick up and they'll say, hey, that one's mine, and they'll respond to you.
Very nice. Very nice. Russ, thank you very much for the clarification. Russ says medically, marijuana is now legal in Oklahoma.
It is. Yes, you are correct.
And he's, wants to clarify, lots of sarcasm, emphasis on this. So, yeah, thanks for that, Russ. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Russ.
Kylie, that is it for the questions that I have. I don't
Look at that.
Anybody else? I know, we're very, very close on time.
That was perfect. Okay, well, moving on to a couple of things. Elaine, you want to take it from here?
So we do have a couple of other opportunities for you this year yet, a couple other webinars. It's a regional meeting, and with Esther George. Esther George will be a very, very good speaker. That is coming up, this week on November 13th. So if you've not registered, you might consider doing that. We also have a new series, webinars on advances. It's analyzing your liquidity as far as and another one, is identifying hidden collateral. So I think Kylie's joined in on that one on December 16th. So, more opportunities for you to learn and grow. And always, though, you're welcome to pick up the phone and call us. All right. We are planning, hopefully, things will go back to some semblance of normality. Our annual management conference is scheduled for Olathe in April. We also are planning our regional meetings. Hopefully we will have those all in person between August and October. We'll get that Colorado date finalized here soon and make that announcement as well. Kylie, you have anything else to add to any of that?
You know, Elaine spoke earlier that the collateral review team and anyone on the financial services team is always available for one-off questions. If you need additional guidance or support, we are here for you. And that's it.
Here we are. Please use the information if you need. We're here for you. We want you to be successful. That's our goal.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate all of you taking time out of your busy mornings to join us. We realize everybody it's just crazy. It's a crazy world we live in at the moment. So we do appreciate all of you taking the time to join us.
Thank you guys so much. Hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, let us know.
All right. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay. Take care.